What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. It's Thursday, so time for another player breakdown video. This is a decision I've been coming down to a lot, and my projections have them dead even, so I figured it would be a really valuable breakdown for us to do. So we'll go over Lamar Jackson versus Justin Fields today, and if you have any combo you want to see next week, put it in the comment section below, upvote the responses you agree with. So let's start the breakdown off with Lamar Jackson. He's played 5 seasons in the NFL. 4 seasons as a starting quarterback. He's finished 1st, 8th, and 5th in fantasy points per game, actually tying Justin Fields for 5th in points per game last season. Over those 4 seasons as a starter, he's averaged 204 passing yards per game and about 1.75 passing touchdowns per game. That's around 15 points per game passing when we're using 4 points per passing touchdown, but it's the rushing that really has him capture that upside and have a really nice weekly floor. Lamar has averaged 69 rushing yards per game over the last 4 years, 0.35 rushing touchdowns per game. On top of that, that's 9 extra fantasy points per game by rushing. And in terms of turnovers, not too bad. 35 interceptions, 11 lost fumbles over that stretch, just under 2 points per game lost on turnovers. So all told, he's averaging just over 22 fantasy points per game over the last 4 years. He spiked at over 27 points per game in that 2019 MVP season. He had a low of 19.7 points per game last year. So that's the general range we should expect from Lamar. Worst case, you're getting around the quarterback 8 in points per game. Best case, you have what? The single best season we've ever seen in fantasy from a quarterback. And I think that kind of gets lost on a lot of people. I know it was back in 2019, but we're not talking about like a 32-year-old running back right now looking back at their age 27 season and being like, well, that's still possible. Like, no, that happened a long time ago. Lamar's still 26 years old. He was 22 when he had, again, the best season ever in fantasy for a quarterback. So the question we should be asking is, how likely is he to repeat those numbers? And to be honest, this season is his best chance to do so. I mean, look at who he was throwing to last year. You've got Bateman starting the year as a wide receiver 1, which was totally fine, but then gets hurt pretty early in the season. Duvernay was a wide receiver 1 after that. That's not fine. He's not very good. And he also ends up getting injured. Mark Andrews, tight end 1, obviously was doing his best, right? It's not like Mark Andrews was bad last season. It's just that defenses had no one else to game plan for, and so it made it pretty easy to look at their wide receivers and be like, okay, why would we even cover these dudes? They're not getting open at all. We'll just focus everything on Mark Andrews. So if you look at their top 10 targets for the Ravens last season, it was Mark Andrews with 113, Demarcus Robinson with 75, Isaiah Likely with 60, Devin Duvernay with 49, Bateman with 28, Kenyon Drake 26, Josh Oliver 25, and then less than 20 targets to a 35-year-old Deshaun Jackson and James Prochet. Yikes. Like, that is horrendous for Lamar Jackson. He had absolutely no one to throw to. We see Bateman going to be healthy this season, at least start the season healthy. They drafted Zay Flowers in the first round. They signed Odell. So they're doing their best to upgrade what was a horrific wide receiver core last season. And it's also noteworthy that like Dobbins, Gus Edwards, they played last season, but as we talked about over the offseason last year, they were coming off of major knee injuries. And so neither one of them was 100% at any point last season. We're now expecting both of them to be 100% this season. That's going to have them, take carries away from Kenyon Drake, give it to 2 more much efficient running backs that obviously defense is going to fear a little bit more than Kenyon Drake. And I bring all of this up just because we need like a starting point really for projections, and a big part of that is touchdowns. How many touchdowns do we expect an offense to have? Baltimore struggled last season because of all these injuries or players coming off of injury. And so they only scored 34 offensive touchdowns. That was 25th in the league. In the 3 years prior, they ranked 1st, 11th, and 19th. So obviously a really big range there. But it's, noteworthy that in the 2 years that Lamar missed, like 5 games in each year, that's when they bottom out at 19th and 25th in offensive touchdowns. In the years where he was more healthy, they were an above average team. So I'm thinking they're going to get back on track this season. I don't have them projected to finish first in touchdowns, obviously, but I have them in that 11 to 15 range. Like I think that they're going to be a slightly above average offense, and they absolutely have the upside to finish in that like 5 to 7 range. They could definitely be an elite offense this season. Another thing we got to look at is, play volume. That one is a little bit more unknown because they have a new offensive coordinator. They fired Greg Roman in the offseason. They hire Todd Monken. That move, plus, like I said before, drafting Zay Flowers in round 1, signing Odell. To me, those 3 things are an indication they want to throw the ball more. They want to utilize wide receivers a little bit more in the offense. There is, again, like I said, uncertainty whenever we have a head coaching change. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, especially Todd Monken. We've seen him operate NFL and college, like different offenses. So it's definitely not a lock that we see one scenario play out versus another. But I think what's most likely is that, again, given these moves, they're clearly wanting to throw the ball more, which is going to increase their total play volume. If you're running the ball a ton, the clock is always going. Teams that do that just typically run fewer plays on average. And it's what we saw from Baltimore last season. When you're throwing the ball more, you're just more likely to increase play volume. And that's, of course, going to be a positive in fantasy. So what does Lamar's final projection look like? I have Lamar projected for just under 950 rushing yards, 4.6 rushing touchdowns, go along with just over 3,800 passing yards, 24.5 passing touchdowns, 15 combined interceptions and fumbles, which all comes out to 20.16 fantasy points per game, making him 5th in my quarterback rankings. I feel really good about Lamar this season, and I would be pretty surprised if he disappointed other than an injury. And we're not really going to go over injuries in this video and comparing these 2 players because the knock people have on both of them, why we're not going to do it, is, well, they're more likely to get injured and because they're mobile quarterbacks, and so you have to downgrade them maybe in fantasy. But both of these players have a very similar play style, and so you can't say, downgrade Lamar because he's mobile and he might get injured, but don't downgrade Fields because they are, again, like the same play style. I'm not really going to factor that in. So I think that's really the only scenario where he disappoints is that he gets injured. They should have a really good season this year. But here's the thing. It's a tough call in the rankings because I also feel really good about Justin Fields. Fields will be entering his 3rd season in the NFL, and he finished tied, like I said before, with Lamar for 5th in points per game last season in his only full season as the starter. So he's got 1 full season. It was a really good season. But it wasn't, like the entire year that he just dominated. Like he definitely took a step forward when you look at the overall numbers, right? Doubles his passing touchdown rate, drops his interception rate, has a higher yards per pass attempt, adjusted yards per pass attempt, increases his QBR, his total quarterback rating. He doubles his rushing yards per game. Like he just was better in basically every single aspect you can look at. But that's from the overall perspective. He did start off a little bit slow. He didn't hit 60 rushing yards in a single game until week 6. He had less than 9 completions in each of the first 3 weeks. If you look over the first month of the season, so the first 4 weeks, he was the quarterback 31. He was behind Matt Ryan, Baker Mayfield, Davis Mills, Joe Flacco, Cooper Rush, Mitchell Trubisky, and Mac Jones. He was the single worst starting quarterback in all of fantasy over the first month of the season, compared to Lamar, who was first, averaging 19.5 more points per game over that time. So for the first month of the season, it wasn't even close. Lamar was number 1 and Fields was last. But then everything really started to turn around for Fields over the final 11 games that he played in. He averaged 90.5 rushing yards per game, scored 22 total touchdowns, only 8 total turnovers, and was third in points per game among all quarterbacks from week 5 on, sandwiched right between Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen. He was awesome. So our question is basically, will that be what we see moving forward, or will it be somewhere kind of in between the start from last year and the end from last year? And honestly, I think we can lean a little bit towards the end. I mean, number one, he's a young player, and so he was starting off his first, season as a full-time starter. Like, he ended his first year as a starter, so it's not like those were his first starts, but it was his first season as a starter. And so to say that he started slow and ended strong makes a little bit of sense, right? And if we look at the changes this offseason, yes, they lose David Montgomery, but they still have Khalil Herbert, who I think is a great running back. They drafted Roschon Johnson. I think the backfield is going to be perfectly fine. Losing Montgomery, that's not something I think is a problem. I wouldn't worry about that. They also get a really nice upgrade trading for DJ Moore. I mean, their wide receiver core is not fantastic last season. They really had to rely on Darnell Mooney as their wide receiver 1. You guys know I like Mooney as a player, but he's a great field stretcher. He's a phenomenal wide receiver 2, but they asked him to be a wide receiver 1, and he's just not a wide receiver 1. That's not his game. DJ Moore is, and DJ Moore can really help make this offense more consistent, give them a better chance of finishing in the upper half in touchdowns. In terms of total offensive projections, though, I don't think Chicago is going to score as much as Baltimore. I still hold Baltimore in a higher tier than I do Chicago. And I also think that, even if the Bears run a lot more plays than last season, they're also probably not going to run as many total plays as the Ravens. Another thing I think is a negative is, Fields had 7.1 yards per carry last season. And I know that, we all have these super long runs in our minds and being like, yeah, he can keep that up because he has all of these 30, 40-yard touchdowns. They look repeatable. Obviously, he's still very young, very athletic. Even if we look back to Lamar Jackson's MVP season, he wasn't reaching 7.1 yards per carry. 7.1 yards per carry is the 5th highest mark of any quarterback in the history of the NFL with at least 100 carries. It was a phenomenal season. I think we need to regress that just a little bit. I still have him at 6.8, I think it is, but bring it down a little bit. He's not going to have probably 7.1. So when you factor all of that in, my final projection for Fields is a better rushing projection than Lamar Jackson. He's at 1,143 rushing yards, 7.1 rushing touchdowns, 3,224 passing yards for 22.8 passing touchdowns, so less in the passing department than Lamar Jackson. And then 19 combined turnovers, so interceptions and fumbles, also more than Lamar Jackson. Comes out to 19.95 fantasy points per game, makes him the quarterback 6, a little bit behind Lamar. And overall, I like that ranking for these two. Both of these guys get really nice situation upgrades this season, but Baltimore is still the better offense in my eyes, and we've seen Lamar play at an elite level over multiple seasons, whereas Fields only has 20 fantasy points in 7 career games. He has made 25 starts in his career. He has scored over 20 fantasy points, and only 28 of those. I know a lot came last season, but even last season, over 20 fantasy points 6 times. It was a lot of up and down from Fields, and when we look at a total sample, if we're going to project him for over that, we've only seen 6 games in his career where he's hit over his average projection. Right now, there's just a lot more projecting that comes in to his ranking compared to Lamar, who's shown, again, over multiple seasons, he can produce at this level. And if Lamar also grades out with a slightly higher baseline projection as well, then I think it makes the decision a little bit easier. So I'm going to be ranking Lamar over Justin Fields, though I will say both have awesome upside, and I am perfectly willing to draft either one of them if they're the top player in the rankings. So that'll do it for this week's player breakdown video. Please put the players you want to see in next week's video in the comment section down below and upvote the breakdowns you want to see. I'll be back tomorrow to go over my wide receiver rankings, Saturday to go over players falling the most by ADP, and then Monday for another episode of Mock Draft Monday. That, my friends, is in this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting the like button? How about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? Thanks for watching.